we want to get done, and we've got to get some legislation passed and over to the Rules Committee where it can be heard the next day or two. So, again, to encourage everyone, if you have your cell phone on, please silence your cell phone. And as is a tradition in this committee, other than our special guest I have here today, do I have any teachers or school people? This is your first time here? Please raise your hand. I want to see who you are. Anybody, this is your first time or you've never been here? Are y'all new that over there? Anybody new? Stand up and tell us who you are and where you're from. Are you a teacher? Hey, that's good. We're glad to have you. Thank you so much. Anybody else? We appreciate you being here. All right. If I could, at this time, I'd like to ask, Howard, would you mind? I would like to ask you if you'd open us in prayer, please. And your number is what, 23? All right.
Let's pray. Lord, we do thank you for this day. Thank you for the breath of life you've given us just to be here. Lord, we ask you to bless this assembly. Thank you for these members and bless the decisions that come before us. Lead, guide, and direct us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. What I want to do today, we have, as I said, we're going to have a guest to speak, and I want to be sure I have a few more of the Education Committee members here, so we're going to ask you to come just a little later, our special speaker. So let's go ahead and take up some legislation. First of all, we're going to take up House Bill 502. We need to make some technical changes, so at this time I'll call on Representative Dudgeons to please present that bill and the changes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked the Rules Committee this morning to recommit House Bill 502 to Education to make one change. I have LC 336127S.
They have that in that folder.
They do. Page 20, line 632. Essentially, the bill had changed the required testing from grades 3 through 8 to grades 1 through 8, and I'm restoring it to keep the code the same, which would require the testing grades 3 through 8. First and second grade standardized testing is a controversial subject that I do not intend to address in this bill, and I got a significant amount of pushback. And Mr. Chairman, I had more controversy with Title 20 last year to last a lifetime, so I am trying to keep my controversy down this year. So I just want to keep the code the same. If we want to talk about standardized testing in 1 and 2, we can do that later, but I want to just leave the code alone.
All right. You have a questions? Number 24. All right.
I'm just ready at the appropriate time to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds good. And I see no other lights up, so I'll take your motion.
Thank you.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second. Any discussion? I hear none. So all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Okay, let's move it on. Get it over there. All right. So whatever we need to sign, let's get it signed and get it moved. All right. At this time, Representative Dudgeons, we have two other pieces of legislation. Let's see. At this time, I'd like to ask Representative Randy Nix if he would come forward and present. Is he here? I don't see him here, so it's hard for him to come forward. Let's let Mr. Taylor, Representative Tom Taylor, if you would come forward. You can seat yourself at the table here if you'd like, and you present your presentation, House Resolution 4.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Resolution 4, which is a proposed constitutional amendment, that would repeal a change to the Constitution made in 1945. A little history here. Excuse me, sir, just getting over a cold here. The state constitution was largely silent on education until 1877, when a change allowed any municipal entity, cities or counties, to form school systems and tax to provide education services. That was pretty much the law of the land for the next 80 years until a change in 1945. Then a simple statement says in Article 8, Section 5 of the Constitution is amended by revising Paragraph 1 as follows. 10. Paragraph 1, school systems continued, consolidation of school systems authorized, new independent school systems prohibited. So basically it said permitted, change that to prohibited. Fast forward to the present. Basically, we have a huge range in the size of school systems in Georgia, and systems like Farrell County with 180 students to Gwinnett with almost 175,000. In fact, 10% of all students in Georgia go to a Gwinnett County school. What I'm looking to introduce into the mix, keeping in mind the disparate sizes of some of the large urban systems, huge urban systems, and very small rural systems, and something that many members of the study committee heard during a listening tour last year in education: flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. What this resolution seeks to accomplish is to allow the formation of new independent school systems, municipal independent school systems. Some areas of Metro that have had explosive growth, a large number of municipal incorporations, and to be frank, some serious malfeasance issues that have had national and international exposure and affected us. Leads me into the second part of my presentation here, which is economic development. Like it or not, the metro area contains half the population of the state, and not coincidentally, extremely large school systems. Well, we've had challenge with major-sized systems like the cheating scandals, the conviction and imprisonment of numerous school officials, systems being put on probation, and the unprecedented removal of a school board by the governor 2 years ago. It hurts the economy of the entire state. We had the honor to be selected as the state to best do business in last year by Site Selection magazine. Submit to you, we cannot maintain that status if we do not improve on education. I've got Mr. Sean Keefe here, who in a minute will talk to you about the growth. At the end of the day, the 1945 amendment did something that many of us would find abhorrent here today. It removed the freedom of local governments to use their locally generated taxes for education and formally ceded that to a county government that may or may not be attentive to the need of that municipality. Yet conversely, it allows for consolidation by choice if two or more existing systems felt they'll be right-sizing by combining. My case with the Constitution on this is by leaving the ability to consolidate door open. They anticipated change in 1945 at some point. This represents a real inequity and that we have an opportunity to remedy that fundamentally stripped away local control, but also allows us to proactively, instead of reactively, deal with issues that we know are coming to our state as our state grows. I have two people that are going to make presentations here on different issues. First, Mr. Sean
Let me
Keefe.
ask you
Yes,
a
sir.
question first. Representative Clark, this came out of your committee, right? Yes, sir. What's your number? What did y'all have testimony there?
Yes, we did. Yes, sir.
What was the feeling of the committee, subcommittee?
The recommendation was do pass.
Was that unanimous?
Yes, sir, it was.
It was unanimous. Okay, very good. All right. So we here now. Okay, so go ahead.
Allegra, Sean, whichever one of you wants to go first.
Good afternoon. I'm Allegra Johnson. I am a mom of 3, an educational advocate, and I'm presently helping to rewrite 2 DeKalb County conversion charter petitions. And I'm also the co-chair for Georgians for Local Area School Systems, GLASS. I'd like to thank the House Education Committee for providing GLASS the opportunity to speak to the merits of H.R. 4. Today, Georgia has made and continues to make important efforts in increasing flexibility in education. Much of this flexibility has revolved around the ability to request waivers from state educational mandates in order to pursue innovative ideas as it pertains to curriculum and instruction. However, this flexibility does little to address the struggles in structural management that very large systems in our state are currently and will continue to encounter. The Constitution only provides flexibility for school system organization in the direction of consolidation. When a system has grown too large to succeed and fails to offer all students in each school an equal opportunity to maximize their highest potential, there is no mechanism to restructure. H.R. 4 provides the flexibility to create systems of manageable sizes in which the unique and individual needs of each school and student can again be placed front and center. Within the folders that we've provided you, there's critical pieces of information and data points. At this time, though, I'd like to ask you to please look at the pie charts that we have here before you. They are also the last 2 pages in the folders that you have. When looking at graduation rates in Georgia, you will find that 34 school districts out of the top 36, this is the top 20% of the 180 districts in Georgia, are under 10,000 students. In contrast, within the bottom 20%, 8 out of the 36 districts are over 10,000 students. On our next page, looking closer at those 8 out of the 36 in the bottom 20%, if we convert systems to student numbers, those 8 systems service 78%, or 292,000 students. 292,000 students in the lowest 20%. Those other 28 systems only service 22%. These numbers are significant. The question is, as our state and our metro counties continue to grow in size, will the flexibility be there for these systems to reorganize in order to capitalize on the benefits that manageable-sized school systems offer? H.R. 4 will provide that mechanism to be proactive and flexible in the structural challenges that accompany these large systems during their continued growth into the future. Thank you.
Sean Keefe.
Good afternoon. Sorry. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the committee for allowing me to speak this afternoon. My name is Sean Keefe. I'm a resident of Brookhaven. I'm a father of 4 young children, so the public education system in the state of Georgia is very important to me and my family. H.R. 4 is certainly a valuable opportunity to improve educational outcomes in our state, but this is just a start. Positive and forward-moving growth and academic success for our students mean increased opportunity for our state to attract strong business partners. To be a global competitor in business, we must offer incentives for companies to base their organizations in Georgia, which includes providing desirable places to live and quality educational opportunities for the children who transfer in with or are born into these families. Furthermore, as our state economy grows, so will our state population. H.R. 4 will allow school systems to be able to move and flex as needed with the strong population growth that Georgia is expecting over the next 2.5 decades. As an example, according to the most recent Atlanta Regional Commission population growth projections, Gwinnett County alone is projected to increase in population by 40%. If we apply the same growth to their school system population, Gwinnett County could be looking at a student population of over 223,000 students by 2040, an increase of 64,000 students. If this population growth were to spread itself out evenly, Gwinnett would add over 2,500 students each year, which is approximately 3 new elementary schools each year and a new middle or high school every few years. Gwinnett is not the only metro county expected to see this type of growth in population. Cobb, Fulton, and DeKalb counties, each hosting mega-sized school systems, are all expected to see substantial increases in county population. While economies of scale are certainly important to factor in when considering the cost of education, there is a limit to this. Within your packet, you'll find a chart that shows that our school systems bloat in size. Not only do we lose the benefit of economies of scale and spending, but educational outcomes also suffer and graduation rates begin to decline. The most recent ARC data clearly shows that Georgia's metro counties will continue to see exponential growth. Will our state's constitution be prepared to allow our school systems to flex in size to meet this population explosion? Will we have a constitution that supports the flexibility needed to create strong educational opportunities that will not only attract strong business partners, but make sure that our own Georgia students become globally competitive to enter a challenging workforce? H.R. 4 provides this opportunity, and I encourage each one of you to support it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'll be glad to take any questions, but I want to just do one thing here. The process with this, excuse me, being a state constitutional amendment, this requires a supermajority in both the House and the Senate, as well as being on a statewide ballot. So this, I realize this is a heavy lift, but if we're serious about education reform in this state, I think this is going to happen at some time just because of the growth. It does not make a requirement to form any new school systems. It simply opens a door to allow this to happen should people decide to do it and have the financial wherewithal to do it.
Yeah.
And as a state, we spend over half our budget on education, but we still have really less than stellar outcomes. Basically, I think this is a move that is is gaining momentum, and would like to have your favorable consideration. But I'll take any questions now, sir.
I think it's important what you said. This is a constitutional amendment require the 2/3 in the House and the Senate. One other thing, I don't know at this time. I don't know if Betsy is here, but whether this would require a physical note too. I think we talked about that, and you were going to ask for one.
And the budget office went through your office to request one, but there was no way in the short time.
No, there's no way, but I'm just saying we'll have it if it needs to be.
I'll point, the fiscal note would actually come. This constitutional amendment actually has no effect.
Just give the fiscal
It would be
note
when the enabling legislation
on the enabling
happened,
side.
because that'd be analogous to the cities, because each one is going to be different. It's not going to be cookie cutter.
Right.
You might have a school system of 5,000 or 10,000.
Right.
So that would be on an individualized basis.
And the enabling you said would come later.
The enabling will come later. This simply opens the door for this to
Right.
for this to happen.
You have several questions, and I'm going to take them in the order that the lights came on. 14. That's all right.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr. Chairman.
Stovall.
Actually, I have about 2 questions.
All right, you may ask your 2.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure I understand that, Representative Taylor, and I appreciate you bringing this legislation. So if you have schools that are in a county system right now, and and they want, and that particular municipality, that city, desires that one of those schools or a couple of those schools for them to come up under their authorization or their overseeing. Is this what this particular legislation would allow that to happen that's not currently able to happen now?
Let me just make real clear that, making sure I understand your question. They would not be allowed to cherry pick a couple of schools. You would say, every school in that municipal city limits. So you couldn't pick one or two. You would have to take, all or none. That's basically a high school and the feeder schools that go to that within a county system, but not outside that municipal incorporation.
Everything within that attendance city limit would become
City
part of
limit,
that.
correct, sir.
Okay. And my thank you. And the second question is, I noticed that the city of Decatur was mentioned in your presentation. So how was it, did the city of Decatur become an independent school system before 1945, or how did that happen?
And when that constitutional amendment passed, they grandfathered all the existing city school systems in. And right now there are 21 of those: Decatur, Atlanta, Buford, Marietta. There are 21 of those that are grandfathered in. So that's how that happened. Okay. But since 1945, there have been no independent school systems.
Okay, I did have one more question, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
All right. And how would this affect the property taxes for those city residents that now they're paying county taxes, and now if the city, will that money now revert back to that particular city limit?
The money would follow the students.
Okay. All right,
The
thank
state money would be there, but the
state money, but the local property tax.
local money would come from the city, right?
Correct.
Just like Buford it does now, Buford city taxes plus their state money, Decatur city. Yeah. All right.
Yes, sir.
Next is number 20. Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is actually just a statement for the record. I talked about the subcommittee. I think it's very important. If this resolution passes, we need strong general enabling legislation about the guidelines of how these things should take place. I don't think the first bill needs to be forming municipal city school system X. We need to set up, there's a lot of details into how you would do this divorce, for lack of a better word. And so I want to just make sure for the record that if this is step one, the amendment, the next step is strong general enabling before we look at an individual school system.
And I couldn't agree
Very
more.
strong.
I could not agree more. I mean, this process, we need to have a process.
Yeah, that was my question about enabling, because the devil's in the details.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
And this, like I said, literally opens the door and would come back at a later time with a very strong and in consultation with this committee to bring something like that back.
All right, number 26. That's Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. In the presentation a while ago, it was discussed about the graduation rate and so forth, but it would seem to me that if you have the same attendance area, you're going to have the same students. Would that not be correct?
I'll give you in a larger county, the attendance area is the county. I'll use my county, DeKalb, 720,000 residents. That is a lot more than most counties in the states. And they're very diverse communities. You have large immigrant communities in parts of the county. You have wealthy. You have not so wealthy. But what you have being delivered now is almost a cookie cutter approach, and one size does not work for all in these mega systems.
But if your graduation, if your school is working in the area that you're wanting to make an independent school system, then why would you want to do that? I live in a county that has 2 independent schools. I'm the only county in the state that's got two independent systems and a county system, and I see the problems that are coming from having. There's some good things that come out of it, but we've got one independent system that's flourishing, and the other independent that's barely holding on, and I'm concerned for those. Getting back to the lady's comment about the property taxes, you're going to go down from the whole county collecting property tax on to just maybe a few thousand properties that are going to be collected for. And so I have a problem with your base there.
Again, this is the constitutional amendment. The enabling legislation down the line would address the fiscal issues, but this basically goes back to good local governance. I mean, you're going to have systems that are probably not going to might not do as well, but you're going to have systems that are going to flourish under this and shine.
But if you don't know which, of course, you don't know which ones are going to flourish and shine and which ones are going to go under. Is that a price that needs to be paid
I think you vet each bill individually, like our cityhood bills that we've done here. I think we've vetted them incredibly well here. Each of those cities from Sandy Springs on has done it just done fantastically. Kept the taxes. My city of Dunwoody kept the taxes at the same rate that we incorporated at, where the county's taxes have gone up 70% since then. So yes, I think it can make a heck of a difference.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Dixon.
I don't have a question. I also have a couple of statements I'd like to make. We have been talking at some length about schools that aren't performing well. We had several meetings this morning about that. And invariably when we talk about it, and we ask, what is the primary reason for schools that aren't performing? The answer is leadership. Making a smaller system is not going to make it a better system just by itself. It's all going to depend on leadership. You've got Gwinnett County Schools, which is doing extremely well.
I agree.
They're larger than DeKalb.
I agree.
So it's not the size of the system that makes the difference. It's the leadership in the system. It's the leadership in the schools. It's the leadership in the communities. And in terms of financial impact, there is a significant financial impact that occurs from this. You take DeKalb County and start to carve it up into little districts. The districts that happen to have some of the industry in it, or that have the very affluent homes in it, they'll be able to finance fairly easily. But you go out to some of your other areas then that don't have any of the industry in it and don't have any large affluent homes, property values, they're going to struggle to finance their systems. I have consistently opposed changing the Constitution to allow creation of additional school systems. It also increases the cost to the state. I mean, there's no way around that. You create more systems, you create more leadership on top of what we already have. Now, money follows the student, that's true. But there are a lot of other costs that are system-based, not student-based. And so when you create a new system, you create a new cost. And when you create a new cost, because we have a finite number of dollars to put into it, the end result is that every system is going to have a little smaller piece of the pie in the financial side too. I'm not particularly ready for my small system to start to lose dollars so that the DeKalb can try to solve their problems without changing their leadership. So I would oppose and would encourage others to oppose this one moving forward.
You know, one thing you said, Representative Benton was mentioned a while ago. I remember what you said about the who has the industry in his district. I remember in your district we used to talk about the three. When one of the city schools had all the money, the county school had no tax base because of the city. That was a problem. Representative Carter, you had a question. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to say that I come from a very small school system, and it's the 13th best graduation rate in the state, even though we are a very poor rural county. And I think one of the reasons why we have such a great system is because of leadership, as Chairman Dixon says. But I think it really helps me if you're small. I really does. You know, I know the kids. I know the teachers. The closer the school board is to the teachers and the kids, I really think the better. It follows the principles of Ronald Reagan, where local control is in general best, and I really like this idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Belton. All right, anybody else? Now, I have no one else. All right. I have 14. That's all right. Yes, sir.
I have another question that,
Yes.
and this deals with the three options that the school systems are now have to make by June. And I want to know, how would this affect those school systems, those schools that are up under the county system and say they've chosen IE squared or whatever, and then now the local municipality now takes over those schools? What happens with that choice that was made by the county, And will those municipalities now get a new option of choosing, or will they have to go with whatever was already chosen?
That is not part of this amendment, but that would come under the enabling legislation, again, setting out the structure for that, whether they would have a choice, whether they'd have to grandfather in. So I don't know the answer to that question, but that's not part of this. It's down the line.
Yeah, that's the ice. They're choosing that this year. Of course, what would happen if this happened, that school would become separate, if that law stays, if that's what they do after the QB Study Commission, which I doubt very seriously that things are going to stay the same. I think they would just, if they were a different system, they'd choose whatever they had that was available to them at that time as a separate system. All right, Representative Dudgeon, you have a question?
I'm just ready for a motion at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody comments or questions? All right, I will accept your recommendation or your motion.
I move the House Resolution 4 do pass, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I have a motion for House Resolution 4 to do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second by, all right, DeBelton. All right, do I have any discussion? I hear none, then I will call the question. All right, all in favor of House Resolution 4, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, all in favor, please indicate. And all right, Sheena, if you would, please raise your hand if you're for the motion. Please raise your hand. You got them? All opposed, raise your hand. All right. Gosh, you two made a lot of noise, I'll tell you. You three made a lot of noise. Okay, good, good. Okay, it do pass. It will go to rules, and so it'll be up to you from here on out. All right?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members.
Nick? I mean, we appreciate your presentation. Next, we'd ask Representative Nix, if you would please bring your resolution, House Resolution 394. I thought I did too. Did I have a no down here on this sign? No? Okay, no. Okay. Members of the committee want another recount? Okay. All right. He's not on the one there is not on the committee. All right, Representative Nix, if you would please present your resolution at this time.
All right, no withdrawing. Oh, okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm bringing House Resolution 394, and to give you the quick background on it, last fall. You got to put it to you right on you. It's up. Is it on? It's on. It's got to go ahead. No, it was not on. Now I didn't turn it off. It was off. But anyway, now the little red light's on, so that probably means something. Thank you. I guess it was last fall, the superintendent of education in Carroll County had called me and a couple of other of the legislators and asked us to come and talk with him. And he had a concern about the way the East Blost was divided between the Carroll County and the city of Bremen. The city of Bremen straddled the Haralson County, Carroll County line, and the way the law is now, they have to agree to a certain split of the East Blost before they can even have an East Blost vote. And he just said that this seems inherently unfair. The number of students relative to the amount of money that they demand to do this is not really in line. And he asked that we propose legislation, and it turned out to be me, to change this. And we've already passed the bill, the enabling legislation actually went to Ways and Means. We've already passed that bill out of Ways and Means. It's in rules now. But the resolution came to education. So essentially what this would do is it would be a constitutional amendment that, if passed, would say that going forward, that an independent school district within the big school district could not stop the East Blost from going forward. If they work well together and they can come up with an agreement, they would work with that agreement. If they do not come up with an agreement, then it would go by per FTE, per student, for each school or each system. And to me, this is really the fair way to do it. I know there's some protection from a couple of districts, independent districts on this, but from a fairness standpoint, it just doesn't seem quite right that that smaller system can essentially hold the larger system hostage, waiting for the deal that they want before they allow it to go forward. So if you want to look at that, the resolution is pretty straightforward. It mentions the fact that if they do have an agreement, they go by that agreement. And on line 16, if no agreement can be reached, it'll be according to the ratio of the student enrollment in each school district system. And then it says on line 20, that's per full-time equivalent would be the way it would split. The question will be, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended so as to assure that the sales and use tax for education is distributed fairly on a per-student basis among all the school systems within a county, unless an agreement is reached among such school systems for a different distribution. Mr. Chairman, that is the resolution. That is the reasoning behind it, and I just feel like it's a fairness issue, and would ask for favorable consideration.
Yeah, the way it is right now, the way the law is now, that if a city or an independent district is located within a city or two counties, whatever, like Atlanta, DeKalb, and Fulton, I think they have to agree to call it. And if that small independent system says, no, I can't get one, they cannot call the SPLOST. They can't call the vote. They have to. So that's what it's about. Yeah.
That's the way I understand.
All right. I have a question, number 25. That is Representative Max. Is that no? Representative Clark. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Do we know how Beaufort City does it at this point?
They right now Beaufort, because I'll just tell you, I carried one like this that was very controversial, because right now Beaufort makes an agreement with Hall and with Gwinnett, and they sit down and I think the same thing happens in Jackson. But Beaufort sits down with Mr. Wilbanks. They decide what he wants, what's going to happen. Same thing with Hall. Then they call it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you,
It's
sir.
not it's just an amount they'd agree on.
Thank you, sir.
And that's what you want to get away from, that amount. But they can still do the amount if they want to, but if they can't agree, they have to go by FT.
That's right, and I understand. In fact, we drew the substitute for the reason that a lot of systems do work together. They come up with an agreement, and it goes forward. I was told, I can't verify this, that Beaufort and Gwinnett do an FTE basis, but it's Hall County that gets held up on this, and it's not an FTE basis.
They do it, Beaufort, because I know I worked with that when I was doing we just get an agreement. It's not, sometime it could be, most time it's not. It's just an agreed amount.
I know the people who have been very supportive of this legislation are the ones from Hall County.
Yeah, right, Hall, yeah. I think the same thing happens in Jackson County, doesn't it?
Not too bad right now.
But they do that same thing, don't they? Yeah.
You got three systems.
Yeah. All right, number 23, that's Representative Maxwell, all right?
I think in your particular situation, if I'm remembering right, and I was involved with that when I represented part of that area, they would always talk to me about it. But in most of the students in the Carroll County area, but most of the industry and the businesses are in the city of Bremen up there. Am I thinking about that correctly there?
That's the counter argument that I've been given, is they're on the interstate there with a certain number of businesses that are part of that, yes.
Yeah, and the money comes in the Bremen area, but most of the students then are in the Carroll County area, and they're not getting the FTE money from what I can remember there. Of course, Bremen don't want to give it up.
Right.
All right, Representative Dixon?
Move do pass.
I have, any other questions? All right.
When you're ready.
Any other questions or comment? Hold just a second. I'm not going to take that motion right now. Anyone else? All right. At this time, I will entertain a motion. Okay, Representative Dixon?
Well, let me think now.
Do pass, all right?
Yeah, I move do pass.
All right. So have a second. I have a do pass motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Unanimous. Okay, Representative Nix, you got it.
Thank you very much.
All right. We got a couple of bills we're going to assign to we got a couple of bills we're going to what now? I'm going to get my speaker. Yeah, we're going to assign these couple of bills, and then we're going to get, I'd like you to please stick around just a few minutes to ask some questions to our speaker. So please, and again, Representative Benton, do we have everyone paid their dues so far? I know we don't. You know, it was really interesting. I had two members told me they thought I was joking. You just wait and see about joking. And I would like for Sheena, tell us about Friday for the committee. I see him holding the money now. Okay, we're good, okay. All right. I want to say to the committee then, this will be the last meeting that we will have before crossover day. Now, if there is an emergency, something comes up, I may call one, just be on the lookout for one if I have to. Okay, Representative Dudgeons, what is it?
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, for our speaker, Senate Bill 89, Digital Classrooms by Senator Albers to Academic Achievement. And then we have the two Opportunity School District bills, which we're going to assign directly to the full committee, which are Senate Bills 133 and Senate Resolution 287.
Now, on the Opportunity School Bill, I've encouraged you all to please go ahead and get a copy as it passed the Senate. And I handed out a good meeting. We had, and all of you were invited. Hope all of you got your invitation for lunch today. We had that meeting up in the office today. But I want you to be sure to look at those Opportunity School District bill, because we'll be taking that up next week probably. And so I'd like for you all to really, really get your questions and be ready for that. So without any further delay, I'd like to ask, we have a special guest. Now, who'll be introduced to the guest? Chris, I said, come on. So if you come on up and introduce yourself. Chris, if you would just take the mic and eat that thing, it's right there, good, and tell us a little bit about you. We're so glad to have you with us from Tennessee, and we met with you at lunch, and it's been just quite a joy, and I've enjoyed meeting with you. So tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Chris Barbick. I currently serve as the superintendent of the Achievement School District in Tennessee. Actually, grew up here in Atlanta. I'm a Cobb County high school graduate from Walton High School, and haven't lived in Atlanta for a while, but it's good to be back. Before that, I was a teacher for 10 years, was a principal, started a charter school in Houston, ran that for 10 years, and then started as the ASD superintendent in 2011. So what I'd like to do is maybe just take 5 or 10 minutes and give you a little bit of an overview on the ASD, and then just leave time for any questions that you all may have. Does that work?
He said yes.
I'm sorry.
Quick 5-10 minutes.
I'm sorry. I was being interrupted so rudely by my life.
No problem.
But he controls the money, so I had to pay it.
I was just going to do a quick overview and then just.
Yeah, I would like for you. Yeah, please do a quick overview, then let us have questions, then we'll be glad to answer questions. All right.
So we started the Achievement School District about 3.5 years ago. It was part of the state's Race to the Top application. And our focus in Tennessee, it's a little bit different than the way I understand the way it's being proposed here, but the focus is the bottom 5% of the schools in the state. That bottom 5% represents 85 campuses across the state of Tennessee. The vast majority of the schools that are currently on that priority school list are in Memphis, so 59 of the 85 schools are there. There's a smaller handful in Nashville, a few in Chattanooga, and a few in Knoxville. And when we talk about these 85 schools, it represents about 35,000 kids across the state. 1 in 6 of these kids can read on grade level. The average ACT score is a 14. So we're talking schools that have been, languishing for quite some time. And our belief is that our kids in those schools can do much better than that. We've spent the last 3 years building an infrastructure to not run all 85 of these schools. We started with 6. We grew to 17 the second year. This year we have 23 of the 85 schools that are eligible are actually part of our school district. We're serving about 6,500 of the 35,000 kids that are eligible. 5 of the schools we run directly, we manage directly, and then part of our responsibility and part of our authority is we have the ability to authorize charter schools. So 18 of the 23 schools that are part of the Achievement School District are low-performing neighborhood schools that we've converted to charter schools. And we have kind of 3 core beliefs. One is that if you have a high bar for this authorization process for schools that are going to become charter schools, you make that process very difficult, very, very hard. You authorize great schools. You give the educators in the schools, the teachers, the school leaders in those campuses, the ability to make the decisions that matter most. And we think there's 4 things that are really important to give folks in the schools decision-making authority over. One is they got to be able to pick their team. You got to have teachers and school leaders who believe in the mission and believe in the kids. 2, you got to give the folks in the school some flexibility around program. So the standards in our minds are the what, how those standards get taught the folks that are closest to the kids need to have decision-making authority around how those standards get taught. Third is that we have to push as much of the resources down to the school level as possible. I think, I can't speak for Georgia, but there's too many systems in Tennessee where 15, 20, 30% of the per pupil is getting hung up in a central office to pay for lots of people in a central office that if you asked the folks in the school, a lot of times they don't know what the heck a lot of those people do. We want the resources pushed to the tip of the spear, so to speak, and they need to be in the school with teachers and kids. And then the last thing is we want folks in the schools to have decision-making authority around the time. So a lot of our kids are 2, 3, 4, 5 grade levels behind. And in a lot of our schools, we've extended the day, we've extended the year, and we feel like the folks in the school should have the ability to set the calendar in a way that's going to be most effective for catching the kids up. I mentioned the 23 schools that we have, the split between direct run and charter, and I guess the last thing I'll do before I open up for questions is just talk a little bit about some of the results that we've seen in the first couple years. So I want to stress that this is still very early. We've got 2 years of data. I think it's way too early to make any big claims about whether this is a huge success or not. But we do see some promising results. So in the last couple years, we've seen some pretty steady gains in math and science proficiency to the tune of about 7 or 8 points over the course of the last couple years. Last year, our students grew faster than the state average in math and reading. And why we think that's important is if our students in our schools are not growing faster than the state average in reading and math proficiency, they're never going to catch up. And so last year, across our 17 schools last year, we saw that level of growth. Some of our schools, when we bring them into the ASD, we serve all the grades in that school the very first year. In some cases, we phase in a grade at a time. So we may have a middle school that in the first year it's serving 6th grade, the second year it serves 7th, the year after it serves 8th. In our phase-in schools last year, we saw 22-point gains in reading, 16-point gains in math. We saw double-digit gains in proficiency in our high school. All that to say, we still have a lot of work to do. None of us are satisfied with where the schools are, but we are seeing some promising signs. And I think the last thing I'll say is that this isn't just about the work that's happening in the schools that we're directly serving, but if you take the case of Memphis, for example, where I mentioned earlier that 59 of the 85 schools in the bottom 5% are located, in 2 years' time, we've decreased the number of kids attending priority schools in Memphis by 4,500 students. And I think some of that's the work that's happening in our schools, but part of the value of having a system like this is the competitive pressure it puts on the local district to act with a sense of urgency that, quite frankly, we didn't see prior to an ASD or an OSD type of system being set up. So I think it's hats off to the great work happening from the teachers and leaders in our schools, but it also hats off to the local district in Memphis, the Shelby County schools, for the way they've responded and the work that they've done. So I think if you get the system of incentives, the carrots and the sticks just right, this not only puts teeth into the state accountability system, but it also puts some nice collaborative pressure on the local district, and we've been able to forge a really good working relationship with the local district in Memphis. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you all may have.
For the benefit of the group, please, of course, the terminology we use, and hope everybody understands, you're calling these opportunity school districts, OSD, and tell them how you get your position. Again, you told them how you got your position, who your bosses are, and how it operates.
So I report to the commissioner, which in Tennessee's, that position's appointed by the governor.
And that commissioner is our school superintendent.
Correct. So we operate as a subunit out of the Department of Education, although through statute we've been given the same flexibility as an LEA. So even though we operate out of the department, we essentially function as another school district in the state.
And the way our legislation is crafted, well, you'll know this, this position that you have would be appointed by the governor, and it would report to the governor. Is that not correct?
I believe that's right.
That's correct. And it would not report to the state department, to the state school superintendent, but your state school superintendent or commission is appointed by the governor anyway.
Correct.
So technically you are reporting to the governor.
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think the reason for wanting to come is, it's great to get a bill passed. It's very different when you take that bill and actually try and implement it on the ground. I think, quite frankly, the bill passage is a little bit easier than actually trying to set up a district from scratch.
Right.
So I think if there's questions that you all have,
Yeah.
assuming this bill gets done, that you have about implementation, the do's, the
Right.
don'ts, happy to answer those questions.
Okay, so I'll take anyone who has a question now. This is your time to ask him anything you want to ask and talk about. All right, Representative Stovall, it's lighting up everywhere. Okay.
I have a question pertaining to.
Let's see. Now.
Okay. How did you all get the community engaged and to buy in, being that this was, I know in our case here in the state, it's going to be a dramatic change for something that the community is not accustomed to. So what strategies or what do you all use to be able to get the community buy in?
I appreciate that question. Well, I think that's something that we're still doing, every day. I think part of, what we did initially was just making sure that parents and leaders in the community understood how the schools were performing. I think in a lot of cases when we had those conversations, there was some sense that the schools could be better, but when you really sat down and said, look, 1 in 6 kids in this school can read on grade level. I mean, we have schools that we started with in Memphis where the 3rd grade reading proficiency was 2%. And when you're talking about schools performing at that level, and in some cases performing at that level for long periods of time, years, in some cases decades, I think part of it was just making sure folks really understood what the situation was. And when you talk to community leaders and parents and you talk about data like that, I mean, nobody wants to send their kid to a school that's doing, has that level of performance. So I think the conversation started there. It was a lot of shoe leather, just sitting down and having one-on-one conversations. It was talking to parents in the community about what was their vision for their school. It was lots of community meetings. And I would say it hasn't been perfect, and it hasn't been without some contention, because this is a dramatic shift, like you said, from the way things have been done in the past. But I think what we also have found is that because of some of these promising signs, because of the parent satisfaction in the school once that this transition's happened. So, for example, we do mid and end of year parent surveys in all of our schools, and what we saw in our mid-year survey was about 9 out of 10 of the parents who actually have kids in the school rated the school an A or a B. So we're seeing that while there may be some skepticism, and some of it very legitimate because this is new, that once we're in the schools, once the schools are part of the ASD, once parents start to see what's happening, it's not perfect, but by and large we're seeing parents that are pretty satisfied with what's happening.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Maxwell.
Chris, thank you. I'm sorry you had to go through this twice today and being grilled. I think
No
you
problem.
did that at lunch, but thank you for being here. The picking their team. You mentioned that one of y'all's out of the 4 goals, I believe, was picking the team. Was that if y'all took over an entire school? Did you interview the people, the principals, the teachers that were in there, the
Yep.
staff, and then decide if you wanted to keep or replace or what you had to do there?
Sure. So that's what, when we talk about picking the team, it really is making sure that we've got a team that we think is going to make the school more effective than it was before. So we guarantee everybody in the school at least an interview. We want to make sure everybody's got a fair shake. But we also explain to folks in the building that this is a different school district that is going to be managing the school. So in order to get a position with a new school district, it wouldn't be any different than someone who was working in Fulton County deciding they want to go to DeKalb County. You have to apply for a position in DeKalb County if you want to work there. So what we explain to the teachers is if you want to stay in the school and work with either us or one of the charter organizations that's running the school, then you have to go through the interview process and apply for a position. And what we found is that in many cases, several of the teachers have decided that they just don't even want to engage in the interview process. And there are some that do. We've kept on average about, I'd say 15% of the staff that's in the school has chosen to apply for a position and has gotten hired. And there's actually a study that Vanderbilt's doing on the ASD, and they just came out with this data a couple weeks ago. And what it showed was that the inflow of new teachers to the school, that there was a much higher concentration on the state. We have a state teacher evaluation system that we've been implementing for several years now, that we're actually seeing, according to that system, much more effective teachers coming into the school than the teachers that were choosing to leave, which is what we want to see. We want to see proven educators who have a track record of success working in schools where kids need them the most, and not our best teachers going out to a school in the burbs where, whether they're there or not, those kids are probably going to do well. We're trying to create a situation where our kids that are struggling the most have access to our best teachers in the city or state. And what we're seeing through this Vanderbilt study, that in large part, that's what's been happening, at least in these first couple of years. I think the challenge for us is that once those teachers are there, we've got to create an environment and a culture where they want to stay. And that's on us to make sure that once they're there, that we do that.
Another question, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
yes, sir.
Did y'all have to incentivize them to come over, or they took the regular salaries, whatever y'all were offered at the time, or did you have to give any incentives to come over?
So we have tried to create some incentives, and we've given the charters the flexibility to set their salary schedules in a way that they think is going to allow them to attract the most effective teachers. But we've done things like signing bonuses and retention bonuses for. In Tennessee, there's a 1 to 5 system, and so if you're a level 4 or level 5 teacher, that's a teacher that's getting above average or significantly above average growth with their kids. And so we were targeting signing and retention bonuses for our level 4 and 5 teachers to try and attract them to the schools.
Okay. And that was paid for out of state dollars?
Some of that was through school improvement grant money, but I think the funding that I probably should have mentioned in the opening, I think this is a good time to mention, is that what we've tried to do, even though we've received some race to the top dollars to set this up, what we tried to do is in the schools to have our schools being funded with the same recurring or non-recurring dollars that any school in the state would be eligible for. So, our schools get all this, same per pupil, state, local, federal. They get title money just like any school would that's in any district. And then our schools also, because they're low-performing schools, get access to school improvement grant dollars, which, again, is something that other public schools have access to. What we tried to use, and what we did use most of, if not all of the race to the top dollars for, was to set up our central office structure, which is a team of about 25 to 30 people that's providing oversight for the schools that are in our district. And we use the race to the top dollars to fund that. We pushed all the local state dollars down to the schools, and what we'll do when the race to the top dollars roll off, which will be the end of this year, is instead of pushing 100% of the per pupil down to the school, we'll push 97.5%. We'll keep a 2.5%, what we're calling authorizer fee, to cover our central costs. And we plan on being sustainable on that 2.5% fee when we reach about 20,000 kids.
That's pretty good. One more question, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. The people that decided not to come back, you said you only had 15% stay, so the 85% of these other teachers or administrators or whatever, did they get jobs somewhere else or get out of education, or y'all didn't? I mean, they weren't guaranteed a position within their system they were teaching in, I guess.
They were responsible for finding a position on their own, and so
Okay.
if there was a vacancy in the district, then they were eligible to apply for those.
And you told us earlier the district was not required to hire them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Representative Tanner?
Just I follow up to that. I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. If I'm a new superintendent that's been hired by, we heard from DeKalb earlier, say DeKalb County, and they're struggling, new Board of Education members are elected, they come into that school system, and they bring you in as a superintendent because you've got a great track record. Tell me, the way it works now, they would not have the ability to basically force all the teachers in that school and administrators to re-interview. Is that correct? Under the current system that
Any teachers that we don't hire in the schools that we bring into the ASD, the district is not required to force place those teachers back in.
What he's talking about, I think, is, let's say this school you have that's in your system didn't have that same right to reconstitute the faculty until they were taken over, right? In other words, the existing school, before you took it over, the failing school, could they let all the teachers go and rehire them like you did? Could they have?
In Tennessee, they could. It's one of the school improvement grant models. They can
No,
replace the
not
principal.
improvement. I mean, they could under the old way.
They could replace half the staff. I mean, they've got flexibility to. There's really, and I think there's two parts to this. There's before the ASD, they had probably 80 to 85% of the flexibility that we have. One of the things we did when we passed the legislation, because when I first took this job and I went out and met the superintendents, all of them said, well, look, if I had the same flexibility you have, I could turn these schools around myself. And so what we did is we made part of the legislation the ability for districts to create what are called innovation zones. And in these innovation zones, they are the priority schools that are still part of the district, and it gives the district the exact same flexibility and autonomy we have to turn around any of the schools that they still have as part of the district.
But that is something that's new as a result of this effort. Because I'm just thinking at someone who used to be a county manager and manage local government. If you told me to go in and take over a county government that was struggling, and you said, and you can fire everybody there if you want to, or keep the cream of the crop, and you've got some flexibility to give bonuses to certain key positions, it definitely makes the job easier, because a lot of these failing schools, I think, have teachers and others who are not necessarily up to par. So it makes a lot of sense, but also I look at the parity of trying to give these schools the ability to succeed on their own, and it sounds like y'all address that by giving them that same flexibility that the state has.
I think it goes back to what I was saying about carrots and sticks. So I think the incentives are, okay, district, you can do this too, and we'd like for you to, because for two things. One, we think the district still needs to have some skin in the game around turning around the lowest performing schools, and on a practical matter, it would take us years to get to the point where we could take on 85 schools across the state as big as Tennessee. So we need districts to still be doing some of this work on their own, and giving them that flexibility, and quite frankly, making them compete for the school improvement grant dollars, which is what we do in Tennessee. Districts don't automatically get that funding. They're funded based on their plan. Then they can use those dollars to do the things like retention and signing bonuses. So, yeah.
And one more question, Mr. Chairman. The majority of the schools that you're involved in are run by a third-party charter. Is that a for-profit type charter system? Is it just where the community comes in and forms a board?
There's no for-profit charters in Tennessee. There's actually a law against that in any shape or form. I know here there's like you can contract with you can have a nonprofit board that contracts, I believe. But none of that exists. These are all nonprofit. I'd say half of our charters are local, homegrown charter organizations, and then we've had some, national charter organizations that have track records in other states that have come to Tennessee to open up a new region.
How does K-12 operate in Tennessee? Aren't they in Tennessee?
They're a virtual school that they operate as a partnership through one of the.
So they're not considered a charter in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative Dixon.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try to remember now what it was I was going to ask.
Want me to go to someone else?
No.
You don't want to lose your turn.
No, I don't want to lose my turn. I had the opportunity to ask him a lot of questions earlier, and this may sound like a negative question, but I don't mean it to be negative, because I think it's a lesson that we need to learn here. Any place that they've had these kinds of activities going on, even though they have some successes, there are some failures. And I would just say, you don't need to identify the school, but what would you consider the biggest problem you had, or the biggest, maybe failure is not the right word, but disappointment maybe, and
Sure.
And what would you have done differently to try to change that?
Sure, that's a fair question. I mean, again, this is still early. I mean, I think
Yeah.
if you guys do this, you're going to be, one of 5 states that is doing it. So it's still very early in all this. I think that a couple things. So our biggest risk, I would say, is just our ability, and it kind of goes back to some of the previous conversations, is just, are we going to be able to attract enough great teachers and principals to do work that's really difficult? I think that's bottom line, the million-dollar question. And I think we've put some things in place to try and address that, but I think we still have a lot more work to do there. And I think even more work to do to retain them once they're there. So I think that's probably, if you were asking me what's the thing that keeps me awake at night, it's just, are there enough great people that want to do really difficult work at roughly $50,000 a year? So that's, I think, thing number one. I think lessons learned is, I would grow this as slowly and methodically as you can while still getting traction. I think going out and trying to take on large swaths of schools, especially in the first few years when you're building a team, you're getting an infrastructure in place, you're trying to set this up from scratch. I wouldn't wait too long, because then people aren't going to think anyone's serious about doing this. But I would grow slowly. We opened 6 schools our first year. 3 were charters and 3 were schools that we were directly running. And if I had to do it over again, I probably would have done the 3 charter schools and maybe us only open up 1 school. I think it was important that we opened up the school because we need to be in the trenches doing the work alongside everybody else. But we were a year old, and that was a lot to take on in our first year. I think the community engagement is just something that's ongoing. We have to continue to be able to demonstrate that we're listening, that we're taking feedback, that we're getting better as a result of that. But we just got some recent polling data back, a week ago across the state, and there's 2-to-1 public support for the work that we're doing, and our biggest supporters are non-white voters who, 70 to 26 support the work that we're doing in the ASD. So I think, that's promising, but again, we can't stop doing the community engagement work. I think if I had to do it over again, we probably would have overinvested there a little bit more and had more boots on the ground, doing that work and explaining what it was we were trying to do and why. And we've had some schools that, right out of the gate have struggled. I think what we've seen is that the schools that we are phasing in a grade at a time versus schools where we're going in and absorbing all the grades at once, we're seeing much, at least early on, greater success in the phase-in schools. I'm still confident that we'll see that success in the full school conversions. I just think it's going to take a little bit more time because you're having to take on a brand new team of teachers, which is 30, 40 adults learning how to work together, and you're trying to change the culture in a building that in many cases didn't have a successful high-performing culture, which was part of the problem in the first place.
When you've done that, and that really kind of blew my mind when you were talking about it at lunch, that you could have one grade in a school that was operated in under a different mode. The principal in the school, is he changed as a part of the initial beginning of the process, or do you got two different?
So there's two organizations.
It's your school in one grade, and it's somebody else's school in the other two grades.
In Nashville, Metro Nashville Public Schools, for example, we have a middle school there, Brick Church College Prep, that had a phenomenal year last year. I mean, double-digit gains in math and reading proficiency. We were operating in grades 5th and 6th, and the district was operating grades 7 and 8. And this year we have grades 5, 6, and 7. The district's running grade 8. So they're phasing down grades as we ramp up. We take a grade at a time. And what it does is it creates a lot less disruption for the kids because when we start, we're starting in the very first grade in the school, and the kids coming in, I mean, it was a brand new school for them anyway. So for them, it wasn't a big change. And it allows the teachers that are there to get a sense of what the new organization is going to be like, so they can apply for positions and get a better sense of what's going on. So, I think that it is tricky. You have to have the right leadership to be able to do it, but we found that doing it in incremental steps has led to better results and a lot less disruption for kids and teachers.
Yeah, well, you're as I told you at lunch, you're chairman of the House Education Committee there in Tennessee. Representative Brooks has bragged on you quite a bit.
Well, I have to tell him thank you for that.
But on the other hand, I talked to a teacher from Johnson City Schools, and their response was, "A what kind of district?"
Yeah. I don't think there's anybody in Johnson City eligible, but I think when folks first hear this, I mean, it is different.
Yeah.
But I think what I would say to that teacher is we can try something like this, or we can keep doing what we've been doing, and what we've been doing has led to things like 2% proficiency in 3rd grade for decades. And so I think, I know that if we keep doing that, what we're going to get, and none of us in here would think that it's good enough for our own kids.
Absolutely.
All right, Representative Belden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courage of doing this. This is hard work, and I also appreciate you coming to visit us in Georgia to help me experience this. I have 2 questions, if you don't mind, sir. What exactly were the carrots, and what exactly were the sticks?
Well, I think the stick is the district just losing the school. I think the carrots were the flexibilities through this innovation zone, which is part of the legislation. It was the school improvement grant dollars that we were able to then funnel behind those flexibilities and autonomies. And then, in the case of Memphis, I mean, this has energized philanthropy, not to us, but investments in the schools that weren't happening prior to any of this going on. And the district has benefited from that. So I think those are probably the biggest ones. And then the stick is obviously the threat of losing.
But you said before the 85% of the flexibility you already had. Is that correct?
I'd say that's probably about right, yes.
Okay, so mostly it was the money and the philanthropy
And I think just the fact that the district could potentially lose the school, so that flexibility existed. Whether or not people actually took advantage of it was a different story. And I think this gave them a push and a nudge to take advantage of more of that flexibility. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. So we were in Nashville 3 months ago, and we're about to bring a new school into our district next year, Neely's Bend Middle School. And when we went and talked to the teachers at Neely's Bend with Metro Nashville to let them know this was happening, one of the teachers raised her hand and said, you know what, I've taught here for 3 years, and this school, in my mind, has been invisible to the district. We haven't gotten the resources. We haven't gotten the things that we've needed. And I say that because I think the days of districts neglecting schools in certain neighborhoods, when you have a system like this, the system just can't do that anymore, because now if they do, there's a real consequence to them losing that school. And I just think for far too long, especially in big systems, you've got schools that have been neglected for lots of different reasons and in lots of different ways. And I think this forces the leadership in those districts to think twice before they do that.
That's a great answer. Thank you. The other thing is, what evidence, other than anecdotal, do you see of the other schools competing harder so that they don't get in this situation?
Well, I mean, I think in Shelby County, I mean, they've done it. In Shelby County, because of a lot of the work that they've done through a Gates grant, they knew exactly where all their highest performing teachers and school leaders were and in the system. And very few of them were actually in the schools that were on the priority list. I mean, they did a fantastic job in their I-zone of aggregating and concentrating their best performers in the schools where they were needed most. Now, they knew prior to this who those teachers were, and but the urgency to really put them in the schools where the kids needed them the most, that didn't happen until this legislation got started. And what it's resulted in, like I mentioned before, is 4,500 fewer kids in Memphis going to a priority school today than 2 years ago, which is, gotta love the great work happening in the local district. I would say that, maybe that could have happened if we weren't there, but same system, same teachers, same schools 5 years ago, and it wasn't happening. So I would say that the urgency and the pressure for them to do that is a result of having legislation like this exist.
Thank you very much.
One thing you said earlier, I think I like this group to hear, you said that you thought it's better if you go into an elementary school and start with the young ones than going into a high school with sophomores, juniors, and seniors. It's much harder to turn around than it is to take an elementary school, and as they progress through, they do better. You want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, if you look at our 23 schools, only 3 of them are high schools. So we felt like where we needed to start was in the elementary school because, I mean, just sheer time, the kids are less further behind. They may be 1 or 2 grade levels behind instead of 5 or 6 grade levels behind. And I think just turning around the culture in an elementary school is a little bit easier than a high school. And so for those reasons, we really tried to concentrate in the cities, in the neighborhoods that had the most priority schools on the list. We really tried to start bottoms up and start in those elementary schools. Because, if we get this right, we should have, in schools where we've been 2 or 3 years now, we should have kindergartners and first graders that are never going to know what it feels like to be behind, because we got there in the very beginning and we prevent the problem from happening in the first place. And so that's been our rationale, and I think in large part that's the way it's played out.
All right, any other questions, guys? Your plane's leaving pretty soon, I think, so we got to get him out of here. I promised I'd get him. How long? I don't know he has long, but any other questions from the committee? I'm sorry that but a lot of them heard you at lunch today, and
I hope this was helpful.
But we're very helpful, and where you'll know this, I'm going to do this, something I have not done before. I'm going to do this. Is there anyone in the audience that has a question you want to ask? Anyone in the audience? Yes, ma'am. What would your question be? Stand up and tell us who you are and who you represent, self or a group.
Well, I'm representing myself.
All right.
You and I talked before. I'm a kindergarten teacher from Coweta County, and I get my doctorate, and my research interest is closing the achievement gap in those poverty areas. And my question to you is, my problem with getting services for my kindergarten students who are struggling is the red tape to get to those special needs. You would response to intervention. What kind of process do the teachers have to go through to get that individual help for students? Like if they need speech services, it takes me a year to get a kid into speech. So what's the time frame for getting services like that for kids?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to just a fundamental belief we have in how we've set this up, which is the decision-making authority for things like you're talking about doesn't need to live with a bureaucrat sitting in a central office. That authority needs to live with the folks in the school who are closest to the kids. So this core belief of put people in the schools that you trust and then let them make decisions and push the resources down to those schools so they have the ability to not only make the decisions but budget the resources against whatever those priorities and needs are, and trying to eliminate the red tape in the central office as much as possible. We have a district office right now of 25 people for a district that will serve 10,000 kids, because we believe that the decision-making authority shouldn't live in the central office. It should live at the school. And our job is to provide support and a little bit of oversight to make sure that, once you push that decision-making authority and resources down to the school, that folks are using it correctly. But we try and have as much of that, the things you're talking about, live at the school level and not, layers of approval in the central office.
This isn't a central office issue. We've got to keep our numbers down. Disproportionality issue is what it is. Like, we can't have this many African Americans in special ed because speech falls under the special ed umbrella. So a lot of the issues that we're fighting with in the local school district is just trying to make our numbers look good when it really shouldn't matter what color the student is or their gender or even where they live. It's just whether or not they have a deficit or not and getting to address it. I mean, I have one little girl in my class. She has a major speech issue. She still hasn't gotten in. It's been 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to specifics. All I know is that we're driven by needs of kids and not.
Comes to you and says this child needs speech. The speech language pathologist has done it. Do you make them go through the RTI process, or do you just automatically put that child if the speech language pathologist says that there's a deficit?
Well, I mean, there needs to be an evaluation process that happens at the school level, but we try and go through that process. I mean, we've never had to wait 3 years to provide service to a child. But again, the best part is they don't have to come talk to me because they've got the ability at the school to work with their principal and make the decision that's going to be in the best interest of the kids.
All right, I hate to let you get out of here, but we appreciate you coming, and we're adjourned, and we'll come down and talk with you. Please come down, and I want to thank you again for being with us. It's
Appreciate
been
it.
very
Thank you.
helpful.